pagan rituals, mysterious symbols, and secret societies. The world of the founders of this country was much different than you've probably imagined. But what's perhaps even more surprising is some of the beliefs hidden before our very eyes in the iconic emblems of American history. No one knows this more than my dear friend and renowned author, Dr. Thomas Horton. Thank you, Tom, for being with us.
Great to be with you, Jimmy.
It might be surprising to many, but pagan and occult symbols have been knit into the fabric of our nation's founding, and they've been on display decade after decade, hidden right in front of us in the secrets of the Great Seal of the United States. But before we get to that, Tom, let's talk about the Freemason connection to the Declaration of Independence. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Declaration of Independence, of course, a very important part of the history of America. July 4th, 1776. You have 56 men that have devoted their lives and honors and wealth to the defense of this great idea. And they're declaring that we are now a free nation, independent of British oversight. The authors of the Declaration of Independence was John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And those three guys would also play a really important role in the design of the Great Seal of the United States that we're going to talk about in a moment. But you know, Pastor, you pastor very large churches, much larger than anything I ever pastored. And you would know one thing to be true, that when you are selecting a committee, like a steering committee, and you give them a responsibility, they're going to design something or they're going to establish a new ministry in your church, whatever, you make sure that you pick people who are uniquely qualified to be able to do that. So it's their talent, their education, their worldview, their philosophy, whatever. And in this case, it would be towards the designing of a great seal, which makes these three men, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, makes them very interesting. And it's definitely a part of American history that anybody can verify, and they probably will be shocked to learn that, like John Adams, he was raised in a strict Congregationalist family. As he got older, he utterly rejected the Christian teachings of his parents. He became something like a universalist, right? So he had a hodgepodge of whatever he wanted to believe. You just put it all together in a big soup and call that your religious ideas. But he utterly rejected the divinity of Jesus Christ. He rejected the Trinity. So he was quite hostile to the early Pilgrim movement, the Puritan movement in America.
I think that's shocking to most people.
Well, it is shocking. And like I say, you know, whenever I hear people say America was founded as a Christian nation, I boldly proclaim that to be factually untrue. But it became a Christian nation because of the revivalists and the preachers and those who John Adams actually despised. But Thomas Jefferson was worse than John Adams. Yeah. Thomas Jefferson called the teachings of Jesus the ravings of a madman. And in fact, he took a New Testament and took a pair of scissors and a razor blade. And he went through the entire New Testament and cut out every reference to the deity of Jesus Christ, every miracle that he performed, any statements about him being God in flesh or implications of that. Cut the book of Revelation totally out of the New Testament because it talked about the second coming of Jesus Christ. So he was worse than John Adams. By the way, that's called the Jefferson Bible. And it is kept now at the Smithsonian, and once in a while they put it out for public viewing for people to go and see this Bible that he taped back together after removing everything about the deity of Jesus. And then you had Benjamin Franklin. Now, Benjamin Franklin was a 33rd degree master Freemason. He was the head of lodges both here in early America and across Europe. But in addition to that, he was also a member of the Hellfire Club that met at that time on a regular basis to conduct orgies and to mock traditional Christianity. So it tells you something about his mindset. Again, anybody can Google and read about this, but it could have been even darker than that. 1998, the British press, they published an article that the house of Benjamin Franklin is being remodeled on 36 Raven Street in London. And when they got to the bottom of the house and they're replacing the floorboards in the house, they discovered the remains of numerous adults and children that had been sawn into pieces and burned with fire. We have no history around what that was, why that was happening, but given the nature of the Hellfire Club, it does indicate that there was some really spooky stuff going on with one of America's most famous early inventors.
You're talking about the beginning of America, the very foundation of America, not being Christian at all.
What I'm saying is, and most people don't know this, is that as many as 44 of those 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons.
Right.
Now, they were not Freemasons in kind of the modern American sense of that today. Right. These were guys who were being heavily influenced by the secret societies out of Europe. In fact, in Europe at the time, the secret societies, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, they were infatuated with what was called the Atlantean scheme. Now, this was all based on the Lord Chancellor of England, Sir Francis Bacon, who had written a book called New Atlantis. And the idea behind New Atlantis, and again, the occult societies were literally infatuated with this idea, that we are going to build what the Freemasons called an occult democracy, right? Based on New Atlantis. Well, what was the idea behind New Atlantis? It goes back to the original Atlantis. So you have Plato writing in Critias about this fabled land. And Atlantis had become very powerful as a result of working directly with the invisible gods. They had a partnership with the gods. And as long as they honored the gods honored them in the establishment and the building of their great culture. And they became, fabulously wealthy, technologically advanced. But as Plato tells us, as they forgot about the gods and started turning their backs on the gods and no longer honoring the gods, Atlantis fell into disrepair and eventually is swallowed up in the sea. So Francis Bacon, his idea is we are going to build a new Atlantis, an occult democracy that partners with the pagan gods for the establishment. And that is what the secret societies at that time were enmeshed with. Now, they knew that the political realities across Europe at the time was not going to allow them to infiltrate any of the established governments to start building this occult democracy. So they cast their eyes on early America. Here we were, embryonic. We just signed a Declaration of Independence. We're setting ourselves apart from Britain, and we are going to have our own colonization scheme. And so they saw the sending of money, wealth, influence over here to work with the early Freemasons to develop that occult democracy here in what eventually would become the United States of America.
That's absolutely amazing. Okay, so you were talking about Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams in the Great Seal. So what happened when they began the task of coming up with a Great Seal?
Yeah, so, and by the way, I should also point out for anybody that might want to look it up, you can Google the 1910 Newfoundland stamp that has a picture of Lord Bacon on the front of it, and it literally says, Lord Bacon, guiding spirit of colonization scheme. So it was a well-known fact at the time that his vision of establishing here the New Atlantis was the guiding vision behind early Freemasonry.
We're going to talk about the dollar bill, and it's absolutely fascinating because this is fact. I mean, what Dr. Horne is saying is absolute fact, and you're carrying in your pocket and on your person most of the time these occultic symbols that you're going to talk about the details of what they mean. But the average person, if we knew, even though our Bible or the dollar says in God we trust on it, well, the God that they're talking about on the dollar bill is not necessarily the God that we think of.
Well, absolutely right. As a matter of fact, after the Great Seal was designed, it was the average people in America, the ones that signed on to Plymouth Rock, we're going to take the gospel into the new world. And they were complaining to Congress. They were saying, in the future, if this country was decimated, what they called antiquaries, historians of the future, would determine that we had been a pagan nation based on the symbolism that is on the Great Seal of the United States. I followed up with that in one of my books and said, just do this as a mental experiment. This is not a biblical worldview. But imagine in a sci-fi kind of way that 1 billion years into the future, aliens came here and found America decimated, and they saw this phrase, "In God we trust," and the only thing that they could use to determine what God you were talking about on the U.S. $1 bill would be the symbols that were there, which are Egyptian and attest to the god Osiris, and also the Greek mottos, which refer to the second coming of the god Apollo. And then the symbolism on the Great Seal itself, we can get into that actually talk about Jupiter as the greatest gods of the heavens. And that was literally the god that Thomas Jefferson wanted America dedicated to.
Dr. Hornig, you'll tell us what happened. How did we get our dollar bill, and how did all that happen?
In the 1930s, the then Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, he was a 32nd degree Freemason, and he noticed the Great Seal of the United States, and he writes about this in his autobiography, that he became convinced that this was a Masonic prophecy about the arrival of a future president who would become the incarnation of the God who is on the Great Seal and lead the world into the New World Order. So he points all this out to then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who's also a 32nd degree Freemason. And by the way, both of these men and Eleanor Roosevelt, they were all very mystically minded. Both of them were devotees of Agni Yogi Society founder and theosophist Nicholas Roerich, right? Who was a Russian immigrant who had migrated to the United States in the 1920s. And by the 1930s, when all this was happening, he had become very popular across the New York scene as a teacher of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy, right? So this is really just the idea that there are enlightened individuals, right? And they are guiding the world toward what different famous Freemasons, including Nicholas Roerich, even occultist Aleister Crowley, referred to as the Aeon of Horus, or the Age of Horus, which is actually on the Great Seal of the United States. We'll talk about that in a moment, which speaks to the second coming of the god Osiris, or in the Greek mind, the second coming of the god Apollo. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, by the way, who went on to become the only American president to actually serve 4 terms. So he was in his second presidential term in the 1930s when Henry Wallace, who was very much a disciple of Nicholas Roerich, and the belief that we are moving towards the fulfillment of a new golden pagan age. By the way, if people want interesting reading, they can go to Google and type in Dear Guru letters, because in his third attempt at becoming a president, and he did, Franklin Roosevelt picked Henry Wallace to be his VP. But the Republicans came into possession of the so-called Dear Guru letters, which had been written during the 1930s. And this whole conversation about the Great Seal being on the dollar was rumbling in these guys' minds. And the Dear Guru letters are Henry Wallace, and in some cases for him and Roosevelt, writing back and forth to Nicholas Roerich about how much they are looking forward to the arrival of the new golden pagan age. And Wallace, in his own autobiography, kind of fancies himself maybe as being the guy who's going to eventually get to become president, and he's going to become the Osiris or the Apollo, right? So these guys were very fascinated by this idea. Bottom line was, President Roosevelt became convinced that this was a prophecy. It was a Masonic prophecy, and he pushed for, and finally by 1935 had it placed on the backside of the US dollar bill. And here's one other interesting thing. He insisted that the reverse side of the Great Seal be placed on the left against protocol, because Americans read left to right, or from top to bottom. And the front side of the Great Seal should have been on the left or on the top, but instead he had that order reversed. And according to experts It's because he wanted the reverse side of the Great Seal to be viewed as what was called the superior side of the Great Seal, because that's the side of the seal that has the prophecies about the second coming of Apollo.
Okay, so talk about Osiris and how that is connected to Freemasonry.
In Egyptian mythology, Osiris formed the basis of all of their important cosmology. It's actually kind of a short story. It's the idea that Osiris's evil brother Set was jealous of him. He conspired with 72 ruffians, as the Freemasons
and that's an
refer to them.
important number.
It's a really important number. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
But he conspired with 72. They captured Osiris, nailed him in a box, delivered it to Set. Set murdered his brother Osiris, chopped his body into 14 pieces, threw those pieces into the Nile River. And then, according to the legend, some of the parts floated down the Nile River, got hung up on the limbs of a tamarisk tree. There's a lot of details. But bottom line is his sister wife, Isis, the queen of magical skills, searched the banks of the Nile River, and she was able to recover 13 of the 14 pieces of Osiris. The part she could not find was his missing male organ, which was swallowed by a fish. Plutarch says it was swallowed by a crocodile, but it doesn't matter. Something in the river swallowed his male organ. So she takes his body and she stitches it all back together. And in place of his missing organ, she creates a magical obelisk, which he attaches to his ithyphallic corpse. And then she conducts the very first raising of Osiris ceremony, where she calls the spirit, the seed of Osiris up out of the underworld through the magical obelisk into her belly. It impregnates her. She gives birth to Horus.
So that's the Eye of Horus on our dollar bill.
Some people call it the Eye of Providence, the Eye of Jupiter, but it's the Eye of Horus on the $1 bill. It's really important, even as we talk about the symbolism here in a moment, the fact that it's hovering over the top of the 13-stepped uncapped pyramid. All of that symbolism is rich with meaning, and it is taken directly out of history, both of the Greeks and also the Egyptians. And by the way, the Freemasons freely write about all of the symbolism, and they admit to everything I'm telling you right now.
Right.
So basically, in a nutshell, we'll come back to that story later because it's also important to other things that happen in America, like with the inauguration of our president. But in a nutshell, that is the story of Osiris. And as we go through the symbolism, people will find out why that story is very important to the way the Great Seal eventually turned out.
So talk about the unfinished pyramid. What are some of the important issues or details concerning that?
Yeah, so the unfinished pyramid is made up of 13 steps. This is allegorical to the 13 parts of Osiris that Isis was able to find and put back together. So here's the thing. The missing part of Osiris is the 14th part. And in occult circles, not long ago, like in the WikiLeaks, it showed the former campaign manager for Hillary Clinton holding up his hands with a fish on one hand and the number 14 over here.
Right.
14 in occultism represents when Osiris will once again finally be in the form as a complete man. So all 14 parts now are back together. So you have the all-seeing eye of Horus hovering over the uncapped pyramid. Many Freemasons have written, including Manly P. Hall, have written about that as a prophecy. When that all-seeing eye finally settles as the headstone on the top of the 13 pieces of Osiris, we will have the 14th part, which is allegorical to the second coming, right? He has finally arrived. At the bottom of the pyramid in Roman numerals is 1776, which are obviously taken from the date of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It also has 72 stones. So again, it's a second testament to the 72 cosmocraters. These are important in the Bible as well.
Right.
Deuteronomy, Psalms 82 talks about God standing in the council of the gods, which is a very strange thing for us to read, right? And think, what in the world is this talking about? But when you read it in the Hebrew, it's talking about the Elohim, very powerful created beings that God made.
Right.
Watchers is another term for them, powerful angels that worked with him in creation. And at one point, God divided the nations of the world, following Babel, into the 72 nation groups. And he did that according, it says in Psalms 82, according to the number of the sons of God, the Elohim. So the 72 powerful watchers in heaven, these are different than the 200 that fell during the days of Jared.
Well, I was thinking about that when you were saying it.
But very powerful angels. And they are supposed to benevolently watch over, guide these nations, care for them under Jehovah Yahweh. God took Israel for himself, and then the 72 nations of the rest of the world. And but they become disloyal to God. They want to be worshiped. They want to, like Lucifer, they want to exalt their thrones above the stars. They want to be worshiped. And so they start misguiding all of humanity.
So talk about the Latin phrases that are on the seal.
The Great Seal is not intended to just be fun and interesting or whatever. There is deep meaning behind every piece and part of the Great Seal on purpose. That's the way nations and states make great seals. Right. It's to convey something, right, important about that jurisdiction. So the front side of the Great Seal is put together. It too has a motto, E pluribus unum. Now, it also has 13 leaves in the olive branch of the eagle that is predominant on the front of the Great Seal, 13 olives in the olive branch, 13 bars and stripes in the shield, 13 arrows in his right claw, 13 letters in the phrase E pluribus unum, 13 stars in the crest that is above the eagle's head, or the glory. That continues onto the back, 13 steps in the uncapped pyramid, 13 letters in Anahuac Coeptus. Now, here's an important thing. In 33rd degree Freemasonry, you have some legendary figures, including Albert Pike, who's actually entombed in the House of the Temple, the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in Washington, D.C. Albert Pike wrote what is essentially the Bible for Freemasons, called Morals and Dogma. This was a book that was never supposed to be read by guys like me and you, who they call the profane, or 32nd degree Freemasons and down, right? It was only ever supposed to be the tutelary of the Masons themselves, but eventually it was leaked. It got out in the public. They couldn't get it back. Now everybody can buy it at Amazon, right? But it's an interesting book because Albert Pike, in terms of defining the meaning behind the symbols, he admits that 32nd degree Freemasonry, which he refers to as blue masonry, are intentionally deceived as to the meaning of these symbols that's only truly known by the 33rd degree in the inner sanctum, or the Holy of Holies. Because in Freemasonry, much of the symbolism is we're helping Solomon build a great temple. So there's the outer court, you know, like in the Old Testament, the average person cannot walk into the Holy of Holies, right? You're outside. You're the profaned, right? Yep. It's inside where the high priest is, and that's where you get to experience the presence of God. So the Freemasons kind of dress a lot of what they do in that kind of language. But Albert Pike admitted that we are intentionally deceived. Everybody that's not in the 33rd degree doesn't really even understand the meaning of the symbols. So, as you know, I had the opportunity of visiting with 33rd degree Freemasons in the House of the Temple in a private setting that was put together by a congressman. But I went down through all of these different questions, and they confirmed that what I was saying was the truth. The same thing is true with you asked me about the Latin verses. So the motto that's in the beak of the eagle on the front side, E pluribus unum, for everybody outside of the inner sanctum, out of many, one. It's a reference to different people coming from all over the place, right? Different nations and tongues of people that came here to form a new nation. But if you're in the inside of the 33rd degree, E pluribus unum, it is that, but it's also a reference to the God of many names. So this is a demonic plagiarization of Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one Lord. And Pastor, as you know, the Lord thy God is the plural Elohim.
That's right.
Plural is one Lord, is singular. And so we derive from that like an early expression about the Trinity, right? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, in the occult world, they also have this same kind of idea. It's called a pluribus unum, out of many names, one God. So you go back into antiquity, all the way back to the Sumerians. And this God-man was known as Gilgamesh. In the Old Testament, he's called Nimrod. In the Greeks, he's called Apollo. To the Egyptians, he's called Osiris. So he is a God of many names, and yet he is one God. And he is the one that's on the Great Seal, predicted to return at the end of time.
And you were talking about in Washington, D.C., the Masonic temple there. They have the Bible. They have the Hindu Bible, whatever it's called. They have the Book of Mormon. And they're binding all of those together, I guess, kind of saying all these things are true in some way. And so we're not picking any one of them. We're picking all of them.
Yeah, basically it's an occult idea that there are fragments of truth that can be garnered from all kinds of religious ideas, but they're only the keepers of the real truth, right, of the whole truth, right? To them, Jesus was an enlightened soul. He's comparable to Hare Krishna or something, right? He was like an enlightened teacher.
But that's the official position of the Freemasons.
Well, that and also, for instance, again, with John Adams. John Adams came to that same exact belief that Jesus Christ, he was a great teacher, great guy, but he was definitely not God in flesh, right? He's not the savior of the world. He was just an enlightened individual. Nicholas Roerich taught that. Madame Blavatsky and her Theosophical Society that was influencing the people who put the Great Seal on the $1 bill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Henry Wallace. That's what they all believe, that he was kind of like a Buddha, an elevated individual. Now, back to the Great Seal.
Right.
So predominantly there is an eagle, right? Why an eagle? Because if you study the history of the Great Seal, you will find that along the way, there were individuals who preferred to have a phoenix rising up out of a bed of ashes, representing order out of chaos. The idea that America, through wars and everything else, had finally established this government. But the eagle was preferred at the end of the day because that's what Thomas Jefferson wanted. Why? Because the eagle is the ancient emblem of the god Jupiter, that Thomas Jefferson wanted the United States, this is on official U.S. government websites, that he wanted the United States dedicated to the old Roman pantheon and all of the pagan gods under Jupiter.
So Washington, D.C. is actually laid out.
It is.
In that manner.
And we'll get to some of that.
Yeah.
But so the eagle is the emblem of the god Jupiter. It's the ancient symbol of the god Jupiter, but it's more important. Above his head are 13 stars that form a hexagram. Now, every high occultist who practices Aleister Crowley level occultism will know what I'm saying is absolutely the truth. That pattern is not by mistake. Having the symbol of the eagle, Jupiter, underneath a hexagram is the very talisman used by high occultists to invoke the second coming of the god Jupiter and his son Apollo on Earth at the start of the new golden.
Okay, so we're going to get into more about this in just a little bit. But in Revelation 17, you have Apollyon rising. Right. You have the god Apollo.
That's right.
Rising. So I mean, this you talk about this stuff, but this is the Bible.
It's absolutely the Bible. So you have high occultists. For instance, Aleister Crowley. He was a 33rd degree Freemason. He was a man who claimed that an incorporeal entity by the name of Aiwass had come to him, had personally dictated to him the Book of the Law, the Liber, the occult manual from Aleister Crowley that's so popular among occultists. But this Aiwass also appointed him to be the prophet, according to Aleister Crowley, to lead the world into the aeon or age of Horus, which is prophesied on the Great Seal of the United States. He was to be the man leading the world into that. Now, in his own book of magic, and there are other, what they call grimoires, these were ancient books of magic. Most of them were developed during the 1600s. And they would use things like magic squares, which Benjamin Franklin used, to invoke the arrival of these gods, to bind some entities, including God's angels, and also to loose entities like the 72 to do the will of the bidders. Well, in his own books of magic, Aleister Crowley used the symbol of the eagle, over its head a hexagram, to invoke, as a talisman, to invoke the second coming of the god Jupiter at the start of the new golden pagan age. So this symbolism is richly known among high occultists.
So should people start burning their money? I mean, really, when you realize that occultist mentality that really designed, our money,
yes,
that we carry around all the time and transact with all the time. I mean, these were intentional thoughts and actions that were trying to guide America into a great new age.
Well, yeah, into the Atlantean scheme, that in the very same New Atlantis idea, we were going to develop an occult democracy. That's what the Freemasons call it, that worked in tandem with these ancient pagan Greco-Roman gods, and earlier than that, the Egyptian gods. That is what we were going to do. So that's why that symbolism is richly prophetic. Of course, it's carried over onto the backside of the Great Seal of the United States.
Well, so we were talking before this taping, and we were talking about the fact that really America didn't begin as a Christian nation, but it became a Christian nation.
It became a Christian nation
because of the preachers,
right? Because
of the influence of the church and some of the great preachers of the early age. And one of the things that I want to say in this is that we are not fatalist in the sense that because all these things are in our government or on our money or anything like that, we believe that God has a higher power.
Right.
And so America absolutely can go into revival.
Yes.
We can come out of this kind of a slumber, a spiritual slumber that the church has been in for a long time. There can be revival. There can be awakening. And it really is time for the church to rise up. But one of the things that does to me, Dr. Horn, is, when I listen to you talk here, because I know this is true. I mean, this is verified. And so one of the things that it does for me is just to get me to understand some really evil people thought really hard about this. And when I say evil, I mean they had an end in mind when they began America. The New Atlantis, whatever you can call it. But they had really thought about this. And I think that it's time for believers to think about where we're going, to think about the future of America, to think about our children and grandchildren. You look at almost every metric in America and it's negative. It's going the wrong way. But if believers would rise up, preach the gospel, I think I heard you and I were talking on another program, and you said there's nothing wrong with America that the preaching of gospel can't cure.
That's right.
And so we're not fatalists as we talk about this. This is some heavy stuff, but we absolutely believe the power of God is greater. But this stuff is real. So I want you to talk about the eagle is clutching something, and he has his head in a certain position. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, well, again, the symbolism on the Great Seal. So he's got. He's looking to the right, and in his right claw, he is clutching the olive branches. The symbolism, according to the official narrative, is this indicates that we prefer peace, but in his left claw, he's clutching 13 arrows, which means if we have to go to war, we will go to war. And that, of course, is also even reflected in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. So talk about the Latin phrases that are on the seal.
The phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, that we call a new order of the ages in English, that's literally taken from a prophetic line in Virgil's Eclogue 4 that reads in English, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. This is a phrase that is taken from literally the Sibylline oracles. The ancient Sibyl of the god Apollo, the most powerful one ever, was called the Cumae. And she is the most popular, the most well-known, the grandmother, if you will, of all of the prophetesses of the god Apollo. She predicted that at the end of time, there would be a new golden pagan age. There would be an Atlantean age. Jupiter would rule over the heavens in the place of the biblical God. His son, Apollo, would reign on the earth. That's what this phrase is literally derived from. Let me read you a segment of her prophecy. Now the last age by Cumae Sibyl sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. So this is right out of Greek mythology, where you have 4 ages: the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Brass or Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. And she talks in her prophecy, the Iron Age has come to an end, rolling over into a new Golden Age at the arrival of this God. So here's what it says: justice returns old Saturn's reign. So in Greco-Roman mythology, Saturn was the father of Jupiter. So if you return his reign, you're talking about the second coming of the god Saturn, now in the person of Jupiter, as the mythology works. Now listen to this: with a new breed of men sent down from heaven, only do thou at the boy's birth. So now she's talking about who the boy will be, born on earth under this new reign of Saturn, Jupiter. At the boy's birth, in whom the Iron Age shall cease, the golden race arise. Now she names who this son is going to be. Befriend him, chaste Lucina, 'tis thine own Apollo reigns. So it is literally a prophecy at the end of the age, a new golden pagan age in which Jupiter asserts his authority over the heavens and his son, Apollo, reigns over the earth. Now listen to what else it says. He shall receive the life of gods and see heroes with gods commingling. Now, you and I have talked a lot of, this is right out of Watchers doctrine, right? Where the Watchers come down, the gods, they blend with humans, they give birth to the Nephilim that are upon the face of the earth. And also, by the way, why many believe that Antichrist will represent the second coming of the Nephilim, right? So let me keep reading. He shall receive the life of gods and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them, and with his father's worth or power reign over the world. Assume thy greatness, for the time draws nigh, dear child of gods, great progeny of Jupiter. See how it totters, the world's orbed might, earth and wide ocean and the vault profound, all see enraptured of the coming time. This is literally one of the most famous prophecies out of antiquity that predict, again, the second coming of the god Apollo, who the Egyptians would call Osiris. That is literally what makes up the mottos that are on the Great Seal. They are a prophecy of the coming of who we would actually call Antichrist. So Annuet Coeptus, Jupiter favors our daring undertaking. Novus Ordo Seclorum, the dawn of a new golden age at the arrival of Apollo.
Wow. Dr. Horn, thank you for all of your research and for everything you've shared. Jesus said in Matthew 16 that this is my church and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. Now, what he's talking about there is the birthright of the church. The birthright of Christianity is if we make up our minds, if Christians decide that we're going to overcome anything the devil's trying to do, our birthright is we can overcome it. The very gates of hell cannot prevail against us. But one of the things that when I listened to Dr. Horn talking, you see the gates of hell have had a plan against America from the very beginning. From the very beginning, there was a master plan of how this would not be the nation that would birth the gospel around the world. This would be a nation that would birth the Antichrist, that this would see an awakening of, the God, or the God of Osiris, or, all of those kinds of things. So I want you just to understand that this program is full of hope. Even though we're talking about the reality of the occult overview or the occult plan for America, God's plan is a greater plan. Greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. So just be encouraged. We have another part of this program coming up that's absolutely fascinating, full of incredible information. Tom, thank you so much for being with us. We absolutely believe that not only what you're saying is true, but it gives us hope. If we'll just kind of wake up and get back to God's plan for what he wants us to do, that we can overcome. Thank you for being with us.